Now, if I'm going to talk to people about careers, I can really only talk about 3 careers with any personal authority. The first thing I did was an engineer, and I was not a very good engineer. I wasn't good enough at the detail. Engineers have to be very patient and very good at detail, so that's me out. The second career was management. And with management, you can get more done and you can look at the big picture and it's exciting. But management didn't really do it for me either. I found myself getting too far from the coalface and not really, I felt detached, I suppose, from the doing of the real job. And I just started to wonder whether I could really make much difference. It was a bit as if I made 1% difference to 100 people, rather than 100% difference to just doing what I wanted to do. And I didn't like being that detached. I also found myself spending more and more time on politics, which I just felt was a waste. I wanted to just get on with the job. So I finally found training as a way to earn a living. And I just want to say some things about the pros and cons of training as a way to earn a living. And I've got 8 advantages and 8 disadvantages to talk you through. So, advantage number 1 of training is freedom. Now, you have a different customer every day, you travel around the country, you get to meet different people. It feels as if you're free. Of course, in a way, you're not really free, you just have a different boss every day, but you always have a boss. But what I mean by freedom is that you don't have to go to the same old office every day. You are traveling around. And also, you can pick and choose your customers. If you don't like a customer, you just don't do the work for them, or you charge them more so it becomes worth it, or you charge them so much more that they say they can't afford you, and then you can get rid of them. So you can pick and choose. I had one customer who didn't like me saying the word shit, and they said, can you do the training course without saying the word shit? And I said, no, I can't, I'm afraid. And they said, well, we'll have to get somebody else then. And I said, I think you will. And it felt fantastic. So you do have control over your own life if you're a self-employed trainer. And that's really more of a function of self-employment than it is of training. But nevertheless, it's the first advantage on my list. Now, my second advantage is security. Again, this is really more of a function of self-employment rather than training. But the point is that you're spread over lots of customers, at least 30 customers. So you can lose a customer and it doesn't matter. Whereas if you work for a boss or work for a company, there's always a chance that they'll hit hard times, they'll have to get rid of some people. You might be randomly on their list that have to be culled, even though it's no fault of yours at all. So if you're a self-employed trainer, you've got job security. You've got regular customers, they keep repeating, you can live quite happily without having to worry about where the work's going to come from. Having said that, most people only book 2 or 3 months ahead. So your diary's nice and full for a few months, but if you were to look a year ahead, there's nothing. So if you were the worrying kind, you might start to feel insecure, but don't, because the work will always come in. Which takes me to the third advantage of training, which is the income. It is well paid. I think it might be one of the best paid jobs in the world, which is really weird because nobody thinks of it. We think of brain surgeons and, I don't know, politicians or something as being well paid. But actually training is really well paid. It's better paid than a brain surgeon. It's better paid than air traffic controllers, pilots, all these glamour professions. And that's because you can earn about £1,000 a day. So if you just do 2 days a week, that's 100 grand a year. So training can be really well paid, especially if you work 4 days a week. And if you put your price up to 1,500 a day, work that out. So it can really be well paid. Even before you start thinking about online earnings, where you can have people watching your courses and paying per view. I think the reason why training is well paid, by the way, is because when you're doing a course for 20 people, it doesn't matter that it costs £1,000 because it's only £50 a head. And also, the main cost to the customer is the cost of those 20 people having to spend a day out. So the cost of you is almost irrelevant. So you can charge quite a lot per day, certainly a lot more than consultants who are hired in for a whole block of perhaps several months. And then the customer starts to be pretty keen to know what the day rate is. So training is extremely well paid, and that's a big plus. Advantage number 4 of training is holidays. Because you're self-employed, you can do what you like. You take as many holidays as you like. So last year I went on holiday 6 times. And the great thing is customers don't even really notice. Because if you take a week or 2 off, let's say in the middle of September, If somebody says, can we do a training course in September? You can say, yeah, I've got the first week, or I've got the last week still available, any good? And they don't really mind exactly when the course is. So you don't often miss any work. Occasionally there's a conference, it's on a fixed day, and then you might lose that work. But it's pretty rare that you lose work by going on holiday. So you can go on holiday as much as you like. Of course, it's not paid. So you are losing money because you're not earning money when you're on holiday. But given that your customers are probably going to fit in either before or after your holiday, you're actually not losing work. It's only when you're completely rammed and you can sell every day that it costs you income to go on holiday. And when you get to that point, you really need a break, and you're earning plenty anyway, so it's not a problem. So holidays really are a big plus. I couldn't possibly go back to only having 4 weeks a year of holiday. I think I'd feel quite claustrophobic. So I probably have between 10 and 20 weeks a year of holiday every year. Advantage number 5 of training as a career is that it's fun. You get to turn up and have a laugh with a bunch of people. And you can tell stories and they'll tell you stories, and you learn things, and there's banter, and it's a really fun job. And it's relatively easy because you know what you're going to say. You're talking about something that you know about. So from that point of view, it's relatively easy. It's not like consultancy where you have to solve difficult problems and give a big presentation at the end and try to make sure the customer is happy. With training, you just turn up and you talk about what you know about and have a laugh with the people on the course. And of course, they're not fun every time, but most days there's going to be some fun people on the course. So I would say that most of my days are quite fun, and some of my days are really fun. And that takes me to the next advantage, which is that you get thanked. It's really rewarding. You can see people learn, you can see people think, now I understand project management or whatever. Well, now I know what I'm going to do with that difficult person. So it's really quite satisfying and enjoyable. And they usually thank you at the end of the day. It was really great. We learned loads of stuff. Sometimes you meet them a year later and they go, oh, that course has turned out to be so useful. So if you like helping people and you like getting some thanks, then training's a great job. I never got much thanks when I was a manager, but with training, I get thanked all the time. I've just got 2 more advantages before we get to the snags. And my next advantage is that you never get bored. So I used to always get bored with my jobs after 2 or 3 years, 4 at the most. But I've been doing training for 20 years. I've never got bored. And I think that's because it's in a different place every day with a different group of people every day. And I tend to do a different subject every day. I would really recommend having several subjects, because if you just do one subject, I think you might get bored. But I really like the way that I get that variety. So every day is different and every day gives you a buzz. And I've found I've never got bored. Now, my final advantage of training is you can do it from home. And normally there's a lot of travel, but now that Zoom has arrived, I think it would be possible to do all your training from home if you wanted to. If you didn't like travel, or if you perhaps had to pick up your kids from school at 3 o'clock every day or something like that, or perhaps caring for an elderly relative, or even if you were, say, in a wheelchair and you couldn't get out and about, then you could do Zoom training from your desk, and you could do that every day from home. And I think that could be a big plus for some people. So those are my 8 advantages of training. Let's look at the 8 disadvantages. So the 8 disadvantages of working as a management trainer. And the first disadvantage is it does take a while to get established. 2 or 3 years at least, possibly 5 years before you're really well established. So the first year you'll be scrabbling around trying to find customers, and they'll be booking training in 6 months' time, and you'll be lucky if you make 20 or 30k in the first year. But there is more repeat work than you expect. And once you're established, you just get repeat work from your existing customers. Some go quiet for a couple of years, but then they come back to life again. So if you've got maybe 50 or 60 customers, you'll always have 30 active ones. And that's plenty for you to live off forever. And you'll get referrals as well when people move to other companies and they get you into there as well. So minimal selling will be required once you're established, but it does take time to get to that point. So if you want a quick fix, training is no good for you. It's going to take several years. Now, my second disadvantage of working as a trainer is, really this is a disadvantage of every self-employed job, is that you have to be able to sell and do. So if you're a builder or a graphic designer or whatever, if you're working on your own, you've got to be able to sell it and do it. And it's the same with training. So you have to be able to go into a customer and convince them to hire you. Now, for most trainers, this is not a problem because they're used to chatting anyway. So it's not as if you're a graphic designer and you're very introvert and you can't bear to talk to a customer. So if you're a trainer, it's going to go fine when you go to see a customer, because the one thing you can do is talk about your courses. I could talk for a whole day about my time management course because that's what I do on my time management course. So I think it's relatively easy to learn to sell, but it does take a little bit of discipline to make sure you've got your pipeline full, and a little bit of organisation as well. So you do have to allocate some time for selling as well as for doing. So you have to be able to sell and do. That's my second disadvantage. And that takes me to my third disadvantage, which is you have to be really organised if you're going to be a trainer. Not just to remember to do the selling and to follow up on the leads as well as doing all your presenting, but you have to pack, you have to have everything with you. You can never turn up to a training course and realise you've forgotten your pens or your handouts, or you've brought the wrong handouts, or you're in the wrong place on the wrong day. So you've got to be super organised. It's a very unforgiving job. It's probably the only job in the world where you have to be there because there's going to be 20 people waiting for you in a room every day. So I've been doing training courses every day. I've never missed a day. I've never been late ever for a training course. And that's quite an achievement. But customers notice that. If you turn up late every now and then, they won't hire you again. So you've got to be super organised. Not really a problem, but if that's not you, then don't go into training. Now, bizarrely, my next snag, I suppose you could call it, with training is that as well as being organised, you've also got to be able to improvise under pressure. So it's a weird mixture, because if you're very OCD, that's great for the organisation, but it's not going to be good when anything goes off track, and it will. So sometimes you'll turn up, the room's really big, the room's really small, the room's cold, hardly anybody's turned up, twice as many people have turned up, the IT isn't working properly, there's noise, there's always something different. You suddenly find that they already know all about half of what you were going to talk about, or they're expecting you to talk about something slightly different. So you have to be able to improvise under pressure, and if that's not you, don't go into training. Having said that, I think it gets easier, because after a while, you know what kind of things are going to go wrong, and you already have plans for those. So after a while, you've seen it. So loud drilling in the wall, for example, I've seen that. Or problems with the screen where the colour isn't right. I know that's the cable now. So all these problems that the first time would really floor you, after a while you think, oh yeah, it's that. I know what to do about that. The drilling, by the way, you probably would take a tea break and then you're going to find out how long they're going to be there for. Perhaps investigate whether you can move to another room. But the thing is, everything can be solved. It's not that difficult. So after a while, it's not as bad as it is when you first start. So I've mentioned already being organised and also being able to improvise, but there's another sort of dichotomy that goes on with trainers, which is you've got to be both sociable and lonely, because during the day it's very sociable. You have to suddenly make friends with 20 people you've never met before and become their friend and get to know them and become one of them. But then at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, you're out of there, and you'll never see them again, and you're not part of that organisation, and you're on your own in a hotel, you're going out and eating curry in a restaurant on your own, wandering the streets of Huddersfield or Stoke-on-Trent on your own. So it's a weird job because it's kind of lonely and it's also very sociable. Now I quite like it actually, because in the evening I like a rest from all the chat. I quite like just to be left alone in the restaurant to eat curry, but some people will be very freaked out by the loneliness. So I'm away from home for about 2 or 3 nights a week. And I do get asked quite a lot, don't you mind that? And the answer is no, I love it. I love 2 or 3 nights a week of peace and quiet. Nobody talking to me, nobody asking me stuff, it's great. And then when I do come home, it's great, it's exciting, it's fun to be home. And so I appreciate my home more than a lot of people who take it for granted. Sometimes my wife jokes that me being away half the week has saved our marriage. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe it is. But that's potentially a disadvantage. So if you don't like staying in hotels for 2 or 3 nights a week, probably cheap ones if you're like me and you're a bit mean, then don't go into training. Having said that, with the advent of Zoom, it is possible that most training could be done from home. So if you really hate travel, you could get around it by just doing Zoom training. And I think Zoom is now here to stay. And that is one of my disadvantages of training, the fact that you need a lot of energy. So unless you're a fairly high energy person who can cope with a relentless day where there are no gaps, I wouldn't go into training. If you like to look out of the window and have a bit of a daydream for half an hour halfway through your working day, or you like to put your feet up and have coffee for half an hour during your working day, then forget training, because you've got 20 people watching you all day and you've got to be on all the time, totally on. Now, obviously your day doesn't start till 9:30 and it finishes nice and early at about 4:30, so it's not too bad. But you have to then sleep, perhaps in a strange hotel, and then you have to get up and do it all over again. Or maybe you have to drive for several hours to your next destination and then sleep in a strange hotel and get up and do it all over again. So I would say it's quite a relentless job, and I would say you need to be a reasonably high energy person, or at least reasonably tough. So you could be quite introvert, you don't have to be chatty, but when you're doing the course, there are no gaps. So are you tough enough to be a trainer? That is something to think about. So disadvantage number 7 is the fact that there's a lot of time away from home. I think I've got that listed as a separate disadvantage to the loneliness side of things. I think time away from home and travel is a big disadvantage of training. The hours I've spent on the M25 and the M6, and the travel's not only tedious, but it's tiring, and I think it's quite dangerous. I think statistically there is a chance that a car crash is going to get me sooner or later. And training can be really pretty tiring. A day of talking is quite relentless, there's no gaps, so you can be pretty tired when you're driving home. And there have been times where I've been sort of feeling myself start to almost nod off, so I've parked the car up in a lay-by somewhere and I've just had half an hour's sleep, and then I've woken up and I've carried on driving, maybe drink a can of Coke or a coffee or something like that, and I've driven home. So I think the travel is an issue. So if you're not fairly tough when it comes to travel, I wouldn't recommend training unless you're going to be a Zoom trainer and do it all over the internet, which is an option. Now, my final disadvantage of training is the fact that 1% of people will complain. And maybe it's only 0.5% or 0.1%, but the trouble is, I get through about 3,000 people a year. So you're always going to get one or two who didn't like a particular joke you told. You know, I mentioned earlier on about training saving my marriage. There'll probably be somebody who thinks that joke is in some way offensive or so. I don't think it is, but there's probably somebody out there who'll go, you can't joke about that. I got divorced because my husband was away, or something like that. So you'll get the 1% of people who don't like your sense of humour. And you get the occasional complaint because you're just dealing with such large numbers of people. I can't think of any other job really where you get to know so many people. Obviously something like a ticket desk where you're selling tickets, but you don't really have a relationship with the people as you do on a training course where they're with you for a whole day. What other job do you spend a whole day with 3,000 people a year? So the problem is that one or two won't like your style of doing things, they won't like your sense of humour, and they'll complain. And are you the sort of person who cares about that? Now, I am actually. It really upsets me when people complain. I'd love to just think, well, you'll always get the odd one, but actually it really hurts when people complain because I pride myself that I care and I do the best job I can, and I think I'm pretty good at adapting to audiences, but occasionally I get it wrong and there's somebody who I misread and I think they like what I'm saying and they don't. And sometimes it's the one quiet person, of course, who doesn't tell you until afterwards when they complain. Often not to you, often to the person who hired you in. So then you get this complaint from the organizer saying apparently someone didn't like your session. So that will happen, and you have to live with that if you're going to be a trainer. You can't please all the people all the time. So that's one of the disadvantages that I do feel, but you know, overall it's worth it. Overall, it's definitely worth it, by the way, because it's such a fun job. You're helping 99.9% of the people and they love it and they thank you, and it's really well paid. So it's a fun, rewarding, well-paid job. Why would you not go into training? But it does take a certain kind of strange, high-energy, sociable person who's also capable of being on their own, organised, but also able to be flexible. If you think that's you, I would definitely recommend going into training, by the way. But if any of those things don't sound like you, then don't. It's not for everyone. And just a final thought, if you are thinking of going into training, contact me. I might be able to help you. I have been mentoring a few people recently to help them to become trainers for a very reasonable fee. So I am up for doing that. If you think you might need help being a trainer, and if you think you want to do it, then absolutely contact me. But if not, go for it, do it yourself, become a trainer yourself, or don't, if you don't think it's the right career for you. So there we are, that's my career advice. I hope it's been useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.